Richard Bell and I tortured each other for nearly 10 years. He paraded around with one lover after another, and I held on to most of his wealth. We both had a hold on each other's sore spot, and neither of us was willing to show weakness first. But today I am going to divorce him because I am dying. 1. I looked at the diagnosis sheet in my hand for a long time before I called Richard. Where are you? What's it got to do with you? We are husband and wife, but even our right to ask about each other's whereabouts is considered an infringement. Come back here, I said, knocking on the table. Let's get divorced. Huff. The person on the other end sneered and hung up the phone. Yes, I have used this trick too many times, and most of the time it was just an excuse for wanting to see him. He is right not to believe it. I waited for 2 days, but he didn't come back. I looked at the diagnosis that indicated the end of my life. Not wanting to waste any more time, I picked up my bag and walked out. There is another way to find Richard which has worked for me time and time again. Bang, bang, bang. I knocked on the door in front of me with a little force, and a delicate girl appeared in front of me. Miss Thomas. Her eyes were full of fear, as if I could tear her into pieces through the door. I rolled my eyes and said to her, "Hey, tell Richard to go home and tell him that I want to divorce him. Please tell him that I like you the most among all his lovers. When we get divorced, maybe you will become Mrs. Bell." The delicate girl's eyes turned red. "Miss Thomas, I never thought about that." I sighed and interrupted her. "Don't disgust me, just tell him quickly. If he doesn't come home tomorrow, I will break open your door and smash your house. Do you think you can stop me by installing a broken doorbell?" I turned around and left without wanting to waste time talking to her. If nothing unexpected happened, I would be able to see Richard tonight. Abigail was his most beloved daughter. How could he tolerate me coming to his house to provoke him? As night fell, he rushed to me in anger. "Did I tell you not to go looking for Abigail again?" I slowly poured a glass of red wine and looked at him and said, "What? I'm going to go, what can you do to me?" He was furious but couldn't do anything to me, so he could only say things I didn't like. "I don't know what you mean by this. Abigail has been obedient enough, and there is no love between us, but you refuse to divorce me and let me keep someone I like by my side. Don't you wish everyone was as lonely as you?" With a bang, I smashed the cup in my hand. He was right. I was lonely, so I held on to him tightly all these years. I refused to divorce even though I knew there was no love between us anymore. "Yes, I'm in hell, how can you go to heaven?" I tilted my head to look at him and retorted without giving in. "But I feel tired in my heart. In the past few years, whenever we meet Richard, we always argue with each other. What's the point?" I poured another glass of wine and sat across from him, placing the divorce agreement in front of him. "Sign it. Even if I go to hell, I don't want to see you again in hell. We hated each other in life, so don't hate me even after death." Richard opened the divorce agreement with a stern face and started reading it. I looked at him through the wall of the cup. He was still good-looking with thick eyebrows, big eyes, a high nose and thin lips. Oh, no wonder he was so heartless. How could God be so unfair that some people remain as handsome as ever for 10 years? "What do you want to do now?" He glared at me warily. I sneered. "I only want this house, I'll give you everything else, I'll give up all our common assets, can't you see? Maybe it's because I asked for too much in the past and now it's suddenly like this." He feels something is wrong. "This house is our wedding house. Although it can't be sold for much money after so many years, I really don't want other women to live in it with him. I have a bad heart and can't bear to see him being so affectionate with others. Moreover, although it is not worth much, it can be exchanged for a cemetery with good feng shui. The home in life can be exchanged for the grave after death. I came with empty hands and I will leave with empty hands, but I feel relieved." Richard carefully read the agreement again and again before finally saying, "I'll have my lawyer draft a new one. The house will be yours, and I'll give you another 10 million. We'll be completely clear." I raised my eyebrows. He was quite generous. He easily bought our 10 years of relationship with 10 million. "Your lawyer?" "My lawyer." "If you don't trust your lawyer, then I should trust him." See, I no longer know how to talk to Richard properly. Even when I was about to let him go free, I couldn't help but make a few sarcastic remarks to him. Feeling deflated, I slowed down my voice and said, "Never mind. I agree." He took the agreement and walked out the door. My assistant will deliver the agreement tomorrow. You'd better sign it immediately. He has waited for this day for so long that I think he will call his lawyers to hold a meeting overnight to discuss whether I have set a trap for him. I shrugged and said okay, whatever, the sooner the better. He still looked at me suspiciously and raised the conditions. I hope that after you get the money, you will no longer live in City C. We should all have our own lives, right? I couldn't help feeling bitter inside, so I quickly pushed him out and locked him outside the door, thinking out of sight, out of mind. 2. Richard's assistant deserves to be paid a high salary. When he handed me the agreement, he respectfully called me Mr. Thomas. The whole company knew that Richard and I were having a disagreement, and Abigail even made a big fuss about sending him a love lunchbox. Richard was also a bit mean, and just to disgust me he actually arranged for Abigail to work in the company as my assistant. But she went back home soon after, and Richard started to divorce me. I haven't been to the company since then, and few people call me Mr. Thomas anymore. The young man in front of me is the only one. I opened the agreement and signed it on the last night. Mr. Thomas, you can take another look at it. No, there's nothing to see. I handed him the agreement with a smile. Tell Mr. Bell that he should not be late for the Civil Affairs Bureau in a month. Don't waste my last moments. Yes. The young man said goodbye politely, and we walked out the door one after another. Richard doesn't want me to stay in City C, and I don't want to stay here either. I want to go back to my hometown. I arrived at my destination without any obstructions and stood on the land of Chingcheng. Come to think of it, I haven't been back for nearly 5 years. I went to the cemetery first. Mom, Dad, Grandpa, Grandma, I'm here to see you. Richard is right, I am really lonely. I sat down in front of the tombstone. My parents were in a car accident when I was young, and my grandparents passed away one after another after I graduated from college. I buried them close to them because I thought it would be convenient to worship them. I also bought myself a piece nearby. Firstly, I really missed you guys, and secondly, I think this piece of land has good feng shui, haha. I didn't sit there for too long. The weather in early winter had already started to get cold, and fine snowflakes were falling, making my feet feel a little frozen. Okay, I'm going to go back first. We'll meet soon and we can talk then. I have to tell you what that bastard Richard has done over the years. I patted my clothes and turned to leave the cemetery. It was just time to go home from school, and I passed by Chingcheng Middle School and stopped there. The children in school uniforms all have smiles on their faces. Having a holiday is the most joyful thing during school days, even if it is just a short holiday like the weekend. I stood at the door for a long time, and finally walked into the school. Hey, what are you doing? The old man at the school gate stopped me. I said anxiously, the teacher is looking for parents. I'm really a little anxious. The teacher will be anxious soon. Maybe it was because of the redness in my eyes, or maybe it was because of my excellent acting skills the gatekeeper let me in. I let out a long sigh and walked slowly around the school. Some students were cleaning with brooms. A naughty boy grabbed a snowball and stuffed it into the girl's arms. The girl picked up the broom and chased him around. I looked at them with a smile, and in a blink of an eye I could see the young me and the young Richard. I shook my head and walked closer to the teaching building. I followed my memory and found class 3 to 5 of senior high school. It was still on the first floor. There was no one in the classroom. I gently pulled the door lock and with a click, the door opened. I walked into the classroom step by step, as if I could capture old memories through the stale atmosphere. I counted, sitting where I was then with my head buried in my arms. 1, 2, 3. This was my secret weapon when I was in school. As long as I counted to 3, Richard would appear in front of me. I looked up and saw a sunny-looking boy standing by my table, holding out his hand. Emily, let's go home. The brightest sunset of the day shone on him, as if coating him with a layer of golden light. 1, 2, 3. I opened my eyes and the dream shattered before my eyes. I breathed a sigh of relief, dispelled the inappropriate fantasies in my mind, stood up and walked out. Before leaving, I looked back for the last time. In the silence of the room, the girl raised her head, smiled, took the boy's hand and said okay. Blink and it disappears like bubbles. There's no going back. 3. I stayed in Chingcheng for a month. The winter in Chingcheng came faster than ever before. When I set foot on the land of City C, I even felt a little warm, which was rare. What took you so long? Richard's face looked unhappy. I yawned lazily, rolled my eyes at him and walked inside. What? You're getting divorced but still have a lover? Why don't you get divorced here and get married there? I felt annoyed when I saw Abigail standing behind him timidly, and her words were full of thorns. Please speak carefully. Abigail is not feeling well today. I will take her to the hospital later. I covered my hands, feeling even more annoyed. Oh, okay, then you take her to get checked first. I'm not in a hurry. I'll wait. Richard came over to pull me. Hurry up, don't make trouble. I stood still, stubbornly saying, You're still forcing me? Aren't you ashamed of doing this in public? Abigail began to cry again behind him, whispering, Don't quarrel, don't quarrel. I felt sick in my chest. Richard, if you hadn't treated me so badly, I would have gotten the certificate from you right away. Now either you knock me out and I'll do it with you, or you get out. Richard was so angry that his face turned purple. He glared at me viciously and pulled Abigail away. I was still feeling depressed, so I thought about it carefully and bought a baseball bat nearby. I weighed it and felt it fit the bill, so I immediately took a taxi to Abigail's place. I called a locksmith and then the property management. Who is the owner of this house? The property manager said respectfully, Mr. Richard. I smiled and showed my marriage certificate. This is our joint property. Please open the door for me. The master opened the door swiftly, and I sent them away and strode in. Richard quite liked taking pictures with her, even though he didn't smile, there were many. After we graduated, Richard was always busy, so we rarely took photos together. First we slept back to back, then we slept in separate rooms, and later we separated. I realized that our relationship had broken down because Richard started bringing different women back to his place. I walked around and lightly broke a purple jade ornament that my grandmother loved when she was alive. I bought it to give to her, but she didn't survive that winter. I was wondering why I couldn't find her, and it turned out that Richard had asked her to please his lover. Ha! I no longer hesitated and swung the stick in my hand, making a whistling sound. Soon I smashed the items in the house to pieces. Maybe I used too much force, and liquid began to drip onto the ground. I tilted my head back to wipe off the blood, then lowered my head to meet the eyes of the surprised Abigail and the angry Richard. Emily Thomas. Ugh. I pretended to vomit. Don't call my name, it makes me want to vomit. I tapped Richard's chest with the baseball bat and said word by word, See you at the Civil Affairs Bureau tomorrow. I have finally gotten over this anger, and I don't want to continue this marriage for even one more day. Emily, I've really tolerated you for a long time. Richard's forehead veins bulged and he pushed me hard against the wall. My nose started bleeding again, and I tilted my head back to force it back. What's wrong with you? Richard loosened his grip and I easily stood one step away. I'm angry because you and your lover are angry. I put the baseball bat on my shoulder and said to him, Richard, I've been putting up with you for a long time. Hurry up and divorce me. You go your way and I go mine. We'll never see each other again in this life. Never see you again in the next life. It hurts so much, it really hurts so much. Having learned from the last lesson, Richard came alone the next day. We signed immediately without saying a word. With the stamp, we finally got the divorce certificate. Richard didn't want to say another word to me. He turned around without looking back. I looked at his back for a long time, and suddenly thought of a winter night long ago when he put a hot water bottle in my hand and said, Emily, you go first, I'll watch you go. Such warm hands and such burning eyes make me feel not cold on many winter nights. I let out a breath, wiped my tears, and got on the bus to leave City C. Richard, we probably won't see each other again. 4. I was admitted to a hospital and started receiving treatment half-heartedly. Bed 18. Why did you secretly pull out the needle again? The one who was scolding me with her hands on her hips was a young intern nurse. She was very young and very efficient at her job, and when she scolded people, she was ruthless. I hunched my shoulders and listened to her lecture. You don't want treatment? Tell me. I rolled my eyes and said half seriously, I think it's too cold, really. Can you find me a small hot water bottle? The little girl judged my words with half belief and half doubt, but still angrily took out a delicate hand warmer. Don't pull out the needle secretly anymore. She bent down and warned me. Doesn't it hurt? I looked into her eyes and felt a little sad, which was rare. No one had asked me if it hurt for a long time, And the people who cared about me are no longer in this world. It doesn't hurt, it doesn't hurt. Thank you for your hard work, Nurse Grace. It would be a lie to say it didn't hurt. Within half a month, I had lost all feeling in my hand from the prick. I couldn't sleep at night due to the pain and had to walk around with the infusion stand. Nurse Grace was the only one in the nurse's station, wiping away her tears. I tapped her desk lightly. What's the matter? Shoo. She looked around and saw no one was around, then asked me, why aren't you sleeping? I pointed at the floor stand and said, I can't sleep, so I'll just take a walk. She looked at my face, reached out and touched my forehead and asked worriedly, does it hurt? I wanted to say no, but for some reason I nodded. She waved at me, and I pushed open the door of the nurse's station and sat next to her. I ate a big piece of sweetbread, watched 5 episodes of a melodramatic and abusive TV series with her, and used a big pack of tissues. It was not until dawn that she urged me to go back to the ward. I told her, wait for me to watch it together. I've memorized the plot. You are not allowed to peek. Grace smiled and said, go back to bed. Late one night, after Grace and I had watched 3 late-night TV shows together, I received a call from Richard. Where are you? I raised an eyebrow. What's it got to do with you? How come you are asking questions after divorce that you had no right to ask when you were married? He was obviously choked by me and hung up the phone on me. My good mood disappeared instantly and I angrily added him to the blacklist. Grace was waiting for me to watch TV and asked quietly, are you a family member? I waved my hands. I have no family. Everyone in my family is dead. Grace pointed to her phone and said, what about him? I glanced at the screen, thought about it and said, him? He's just a nasty person. Very annoying person. However, the phone call did not cause any disturbance in my life. I continued to sleep and receive treatment during the day, stroll around at night, and watch TV series with Nurse Grace when she was on duty. But the annoying guy didn't just show up for once. A week later, I received a strange text message. You blocked me. I curled my lips and blocked this number. Richard has made some money over the years. I don't know who has spoiled him, but he has the aura of never giving up until he achieves his goal. I finally fell asleep once, but was woken up by his continuous phone calls. Oh, I forgot, he used to be a rich young master too. Hey, I said in a bad tone, unable to open my eyes. Why aren't you home? Richard's voice came through the microphone. Tisk. I was a little impatient, but I still asked patiently, what do you want from me? Which card did you transfer the money to? Anyone will do. Why are you calling to ask about such a trivial matter? Don't hang up. I moved the microphone closer and said, if you have something to say, say it now. If you have something to say, fart now. Why aren't you home? He started to repeat the same thing again, but I suddenly asked, are you at my house? I advise you to get out as soon as possible. I have put this house up with an agent and someone might come to see it any day. Get out as soon as possible and don't get in my way of making money. You want to sell it? His voice rose a few degrees. You want to sell this house? I suppressed my impatience and said, you're not selling it to keep it for breeding? Stop talking nonsense and get out of here. Where are you? He asked, sounding somewhat serious. It's none of your business. I lost my patience and immediately hung up, blocked and deleted the call. Then I couldn't fall asleep. Keep your eyes open till dawn. I cursed Richard 1,000,000 times in my heart. 5. No matter how angry I am, I still have to be taken to treatment by Nurse Grace. It is inevitable to meet old friends in my hometown. Emily. I looked over. It was my best friend from high school. Chloe. When old acquaintances meet, they always reminisce about the past. That day, with the approval of Nurse Grace, I had the rare opportunity to go out for a short while. I chose hot pot. How are you? Chloe asked cautiously. I smiled and said, it's okay. I've made a lot of money, but I won't live long. Her hand that was picking up the food trembled and she looked at me in a daze. I was concentrating on putting a piece of meat into my mouth, only to find that she was crying heavily. Hey you, what's wrong with you? I quickly took out 2 pieces of paper to wipe her tears, and I was a little flustered for a moment. What's wrong? I waved my hands. It's an incurable disease. It's okay. You won't die anytime soon. I looked out the window and said, I want to die on a sunny day. Winter is still too cold. Are you still living like this with Joseph? When Joseph was mentioned, her eyes dimmed a little and she said, in a low voice. I didn't advise her. Not everyone has to think things through. In life, just live happily. Can I ask you a favor? I asked her, stomping my feet as I walked out the door. You say. Don't tell anyone about your encounter with me. If you have time, come and see me more often. Maybe it was the cold wind, her eyes were red. Yeah. Richard doesn't know? Well, we're divorced, he doesn't need to know. Chloe stopped talking and we all looked ahead in silence. When we were in school, Richard and I were a very close couple and Chloe was just a follower of Joseph. The north wind is howling, and even if there were good times, they will be gone in a flash. When I returned to the ward, Nurse Grace caught me eating irregularly and scolded me. I listened to her and promised that I would never make the same mistake again. Instead of retreating, she came forward and took a razor to cut my hair, but I held on tightly. We argued for 2 days. I just went out for a meal. Why don't I just not go out again? Why do I need to get my hair cut? Nurse Grace reasoned with me. You are about to start chemotherapy, and chemotherapy will cause hair loss. It would be better if we cut it off. I thought about it and asked, would it be okay if I didn't have chemotherapy? Nurse Grace was furious and I smiled and comforted her. Okay. I'll think about it. Before she could say something else to me, a tall figure walked in and walked straight towards me. Who are you looking for? He ignored her and just stared at me with a cold face, as if he wanted to see some conspiracy from my face. Looking for me, Nurse Grace. Please leave my hair alone and go to work. She frowned and looked at the man, then looked at me and whispered, call me if you need anything. I nodded and sent her out. Turning to look at Richard, I asked him, don't you have to spend New Year's Day with Abigail? Valentine's Day, Christmas, New Year. Abigail always had various reasons to call Richard away. There was a time when I even hated various holidays. They made me seem more lonely. Later I got used to it and thought it was not bad to live alone, but he came back to annoy me. What's your trick? My heart tightened. It turns out that even if you are used to the sharpness of a knife, it will still hurt when the wound is torn open. I sighed and said, yes, this is my new method. Don't be fooled. Leave quickly. Come with me. He pretended to pull me, and I was caught off guard and was pulled a few steps by him. Tsk, let me go. I said in a stern tone and shook off his hand. We have nothing to do with each other now, understand? Why are you here? He let go of my hand and took 2 steps back. Don't even think about using the excuse of being sick to get more money from me. You know, we're divorced. I took small breaths and felt the blood in my heart begin to stop flowing and I felt numb. I didn't even want to say a word to him, so I could only pull him out. Get out now, take your $2 and go find your lover. Get out of my sight. I almost yelled the last sentence. Richard gritted his teeth, straightened his collar, closed the door and walked out. 6. Nurse Grace opened the door with some concern. Are you okay? I asked with a pale face. If I can't speak well, can I not have the 4 drip? No. Then I'm fine. Richard didn't appear in front of me after that incident, and I lived a peaceful life for another week. Chloe always comes to see me. Although we can't say much to each other for fear that one of our words will touch each other's pain points, we still get along well overall. I always hoped she would smuggle some junk food for me, but it always ended up being discovered and confiscated by Nurse Grace. I was speechless. As the Lunar New Year draws closer, Nurse Grace whispered to me, the weather is getting colder. I laughed. On the 7th and 8th days of the 12th lunar month, 2 or 3 people will freeze to death. I breathed out and counted the time. Even if I went out for a walk, I had to return to the ward on time. Otherwise, I would be scolded by Nurse Grace again. When I turned around, I used too much force and bumped into someone. I felt dizzy and stepped back to apologize. Sorry. I rubbed my forehead and walked around him and walked forward but was pulled back. Emily. Richard's face appeared in front of me again. If it wasn't too cold and I wasn't too lazy to reach out my hand, I really wanted to slap him. What are you doing? I glared at him without flinching. He looked far less refined than last time, with stubble all over his face and a haggard look. What? It's only been a few days since we divorced, and you've gone bankrupt because of poor business performance? Your lover dumped you. I mocked him in a sarcastic way, but strangely he didn't refute me but just stood there and looked at me. I shuddered, gave him a blank look and walked into the house. Emily. I jumped out 3 meters away and said, "What are you doing?" Richard hasn't called me like this in a long time. The unfamiliar tone made me feel uneasy. There was a hint of embarrassment in his eyes. Why didn't you tell me you were sick? My mind was full of question marks. What does this have to do with you? We are all silent. At least we have the relationship of husband and wife. I snorted coldly and looked at him. No, don't talk about the relationship between husband and wife. The thing I regret most in my life is that I had feelings for you. Let's do as we agreed at the beginning. I will leave City C, and you live your life well and don't bother me. I turned around and walked away, but Richard didn't leave, he just followed me. I don't know if it's because I see Richard so often, but I couldn't sleep well at night. I looked at the calendar and saw that Nurse Grace was on duty today, so I simply walked out with the infusion stand. As soon as I opened the door, I was startled by the huddled figure on the bench on the left. I walked around and saw clearly in the moonlight, it was Richard's face. I kicked him awake rudely. What are you doing here? He woke up in a daze, but he wasn't unhappy. He just looked at me and asked, "What are you going to do? Are you feeling unwell?" My throat choked and I said unhappily, "I'll feel comfortable anywhere if you disappear from my sight." He touched his face with his hand and said, "I won't leave. I finally found you. What do you want from me?" He didn't say anything and I didn't want to stand there and argue with him anymore. Go away, or I'll report you for occupying public resources. After leaving these words, I excitedly rushed over to watch TV series with Nurse Grace. While waiting for the commercial, Nurse Grace came close to me and said, "That person stood at your door for a long time today just watching and not going in. I guess it was when I was sleeping in the afternoon. I pushed him away and thought he had left. Who knew he would come back? Don't pay attention to him. He will be gone after a while. The family is warm and the company is thriving, but I can only say cold words to him. People who think only about themselves like Richard will not stay for long. He asked us to retrieve your medical records." I curled my lips and said nothing. I didn't give it to him, but someone else might. "He said he was your husband." I got anxious all of a sudden. This is a misunderstanding we need to clarify. We are exes. Ex-husband and wife. I don't know whether he came to me out of concern for me, or because he coveted my share of his property. Nurse Grace immediately became alert and looked behind me warily. "What are you doing?" I turned around and almost had a heart attack. "What are you doing following me?" Richard said gloomily. "It's not about the money." I sighed and looked up at the ceiling. If it's not for money, then why? I could only pull him back to the ward, sit cross-legged on the bed and talk to him. 7. You win, okay? What do you need me to do? How much money do you need? Richard silently put my hand under the quilt, reached out and held the 4-tube and smiled at me. Sleep for a while? Don't do that. I waved my hands at him. How about this, you just write the transfer contract and I sign it, then you get out, okay? Richard glared at me, gritting his teeth. Emily, you're going to piss me off sooner or later. I snorted coldly. I'm sorry, but I might die before you. Knives were falling from the sky and Richard was crying. I'm not dead yet. Why are you pretending to be sympathetic so soon? I stretched out my hand and waved it in front of his eyes, feeling even more depressed. Emily, I regret it. Please don't scare me, okay? Richard reached out his hand with red eyes and hooked my finger. After all these years, he still knows how to coax me. I am the most soft-hearted. Whenever he made me angry at school, he would just sit in front of me, lower his head, hook my fingers and slow down his voice and say, Emily, Emily, don't be angry. Emily is the best. I like Emily the most. Don't be angry, okay? Get out. I was so angry that I stood up and kicked him. What I hate most is that he pretends to be 18 years old to please me. Every time after I forgive him, he does things that hurt me with those 18-year-old eyes. I am even more annoyed with myself for always being soft-hearted. Richard stood up as if he was heartbroken. I'm right outside the door. If you miss me, just call me, okay? Go away. I would have shed tears if I had spent another second. How could I not miss him? But even if I thought about it, I would never see Richard at the age of 18. Richard, 28, I can't even think about it. Nurse Grace was going home for the new year. She kindly reminded me. Take the medicine and the infusion well. Don't remove the needle and don't run around. I followed her and recited obediently. Take the medicine and the infusion properly. Don't pull out the needle and don't run around. Nurse Grace was very satisfied. I leaned on the table and asked her, "Can you prescribe more painkillers? It hurts so much at night." Nurse Grace shook her head and leaned closer and said, "Why don't you let that person in and let him accompany you? It's New Year's Day too." I nodded and said no, but it made me sad just thinking about it because he was at the door. The pain in my heart hurts even more physically. On New Year's Eve, Richard was no longer guarding outside my ward, but I didn't care. I took a walk and then ran back to my room to watch TV. There was a crackling sound of firecrackers outside, and I stood by the window to enjoy the joy. Bang bang. Emily, Happy New Year. Richard blinked at me with a smile on his face and a cake in his hands. In the night, only the candlelight on the cake was shining in his eyes. Emily, make a wish. He pushed the cake towards me excitedly. I held onto the door without moving, looking at him with a complicated expression. Richard, you're so boring. I blew out the candle and said, 2 years ago on New Year's Eve, I said I was lonely and wanted you to accompany me, and you came back. Then at 11 o'clock in the evening, you said you had to leave, saying that you had a big project and the boss of our partner didn't celebrate New Year. You had to work overtime. What overtime? I heard everything. Abigail said she was scared and she wanted you to stay with her. I leaned against the door frame with my arms crossed over my chest and said, "The night you left, I spent the New Year alone. I felt that the winter was too cold and the New Year was meaningless. From that day on, I no longer looked forward to the New Year. You forgot, but I didn't. I have long stopped looking forward to the New Year. I also no more New Year's." Richard's hands were shaking, as if he was trying to find an excuse to cover it up, but I was too lazy to listen. I know. Wasn't she pregnant at that time? You should have been there to accompany her. What I regret most is that I didn't understand it at that time. I was still hoping that you would change your mind. If you had realized it at that time, maybe you would be making a New Year's wish now. I want to live to be 100 years old. Can you make it happen for me? I closed the door with my backhand, not knowing whether it hit him in the face and disfigured him. 8. Chloe came to see me and pointed outside the door carefully and asked, "Is that Richard outside?" I corrected her righteously. "No, that's a nuisance." Chloe smiled helplessly. "Do you really want to cut it?" "Go ahead, Nurse Grace is too busy, don't take up her time. You can do it for me. I'm still a little reluctant." Chloe silently took action and said goodbye to my beautiful hair for me. I looked in the mirror and thought, I am really a patient, a terminally ill patient. I started to have trouble walking around because of the pain. I asked Nurse Grace to find a caregiver for me. I said, "I need someone who is quick and efficient. I have money." Nurse Grace kept her word and found a nurse for me the next day, but she was stopped by Richard before she even entered the door. "I'll take care of you." His movements were gentle, but his tone was firm. I was in so much pain that I didn't want to talk, but I managed to say, "Get lost." I've heard it so many times that I'm immune to it. I felt even more upset. How could I have forgotten that Richard was my natural enemy and always went against me? When he calmed down a little, I threw away all his things and told him to get out. He half knelt in front of me and said, "Emily, can we go back to City C for treatment?" I tilted my head and asked him, "Richard, do you understand what terminal disease is? My treatment is just prolonging my life. I don't want treatment. Besides, I don't want to go back to City C, where there are so many memories that I hate. How could that be? Surely things will get better." I shook his hand off and said, "What's the point of getting better? My family is all in the underworld, and I just want to go and reunite with them. Why do you always stop me from reuniting with my family? Emily, we are also a family, don't you remember? Richard, let's shoot a video tomorrow. I think you should get treatment. We are divorced. I'll make a banner and hang it above your head so you can remember it, right?" I took a deep breath and asked, "Do you have a special crush on this sick girl? The girl you liked at first was your assistant, wasn't she sick and went to the hospital for an 4 drip, and you got together with her? Later, Abigail also went to the hospital every few days." I suddenly realized, I see you just like sick beauties. Richard pales and shakes his head. Your habit is really strange. You should go and have a look at it soon. I'm starting to feel sick looking at his face. I'm warning you, if you don't get in my way of finding a caregiver, I'll die tomorrow and I won't leave you my money. I'll take it out and throw it out the window instead of giving it to you. Richard took out the basin with red eyes and put it under me and said, "Whatever you want." He patted my back and cried, which made me feel even more sick, and I vomited everything I had eaten that night. Richard no longer stopped my caregiver from entering the house, but sometimes he would help the caregiver I hired with his work. I turned a blind eye and regarded it as satisfying his strange habit. As long as it's not in front of me, it's fine. On the Lantern Festival, my eldest sister asked for leave and I gladly agreed. After all, her little grandson has a sweet voice and I like him very much. There were still fireworks outside the window, and I leaned against the window to look outside. "Emily, it's cool by the window." I turned around and looked at Richard. He hadn't left and had been staying here for over a month, sleeping on the bench outside. Nurse Grace chased him away at first, but later whispered to me, "He always gives you warm liquids when you are asleep." I feel embarrassed to chase him away. "Richard, shall we go for a walk? The Lantern Festival is different." When I was young, Richard would sneak out of the house on this day of the new year, hold my hand and go to the snack street behind the school, and use his New Year's money to treat me to delicious food. Richard's family is powerful, and he always sneaks out from various parties and appears in front of me in a suit like a little prince. This is the day I look forward to most in the year. I once asked him, "What if your family doesn't agree with us being together?" Richard smiled happily. He hugged me gently and said, "Emily, let's elope just like now." Later, it was true that the C family wanted him to marry a girl of more equal status, and did not want him to marry an orphan who had no relatives. He resolutely refused, and then took me away from the city on a lantern festival. I will always remember lying in his arms on the bumpy train that year. "I have no family left, Richard." He hugged me tightly and said, "Emily, let's form a new family. I will be your family." I will always remember the way he held my warm hands that year, and how his heart was so excited that it seemed like it was going to jump out of his throat. The oaths sounded clear to my ears, but now things and people have changed. How could we have ended up like this after all we've done for each other? If I can't figure it out, I'll stop thinking about it. "I want to eat that," I said to Richard, pointing at a sausage. "Emily." He looked embarrassed. I curled my lips and walked forward, ready to buy it myself. "Okay, I'll buy it for you. Stand here and wait for me. It's too smoky there. Don't go there." I took a contented bite and found the long-lost feeling of my youth. Then he directed Richard to buy me candied haws, fish balls, and an ice bowl. Since I couldn't remove it myself, I reluctantly let Richard make an artificial stent for me, taking a bite here and biting there. "Emily," he suddenly said. "Shut up." I glanced at him and said, "If you dislike me, just go back." "Emily, eat less." His voice was a little choked. I looked over and could only see his slightly red eyes. "Why are you crying? Are you waiting here to see when I die?" I sighed, pushed him away, and walked away in one breath. "Emily, Emily, I said something wrong, I said something wrong." Richard quickly caught up with her and whispered, "Would you like to eat a little more?" "I don't want to eat it." I was unhappy just now, so naturally I couldn't make him happy. "These are all bad for my health. Do you want me to die soon?" Richard lowered his eyes, and when he saw me leaving, he still reached out and tugged at my clothes. "Emily, do you want to eat some rice noodles? The one at the back street." That was a store we used to go to every year, and I loved their stuff the most. It could be the temptation of the food, or it could be the group of young students rushing over from behind, or more likely, it was the sight of Richard wearing a suit and lowering his head that coincided with a certain year, a certain moment, and a certain instant. I nodded and said, "Okay." 9. The rice noodle shop has changed its owner. The previous owner was a fat man, but now he is a young couple. He looks more friendly, but I still want the original big brother. The food tastes different and is a lot more innovative. I didn't eat much, and Richard didn't eat much either. When we were paying the bill, the young couple stopped us and said, "Can I ask if the food tastes bad? I see you didn't eat much." I waved my hands. "No, it's just like the original." The same goes for food and people. Once it changes, and you can't keep it. We walked back side by side, and fireworks started to be set off in the sky again. I looked at Richard's face and thought that people who are loved still have privileges. Make a wish. We're setting off fireworks. I stopped and sniffed, looking at him. Hurry up. Richard leaned down, put his face close to mine, looked me straight in the eye and said seriously, "If God could hear me, I would like to go back in time." I curled my lips and said to him, "God heard you and said to you, the wishes you make will not come true. God can't hear me because I've already made my promise 1,000 times. There is no clock that goes in the opposite direction, and there is no past." The atmosphere was so good today that I spoke up. I didn't reject Abigail's child. The corners of Richard's mouth dropped. "You let her be my assistant. I am indeed angry, but you are the one who is shameless. The child is not yet formed, so I would not do anything to him. Her method is too cruel, and you actually believed it." I got angrier and angrier as I spoke, so I didn't let him in. "You are so dirty." I slammed the door shut again, hoping it would smack him to death. Soon I could hardly get out of bed, and the doctor asked me if I wanted to have surgery, saying that it would have certain risks but if successful I could live a few more months. That's not what the original word said, I translated it automatically. I said no and Richard said yes. I laughed at him. "You have no say. You are not even qualified to sign my critical illness notice now." He was crying again and I didn't want to see it. We're no longer related. He can't make decisions for me. No one in this world can make decisions for me. I never let Richard in. He slept on a chair outside the door for a long time. Nurse Grace even came to persuade me not to let him in. I was shocked. "You are on my side." Nurse Grace smiled and said, "Yes, but you covered him with a blanket secretly. Whoever loses the city first, I will lose the city first." I still didn't let him in. I told Nurse Grace, "This is the only thing I can insist on. At the end of life, if there is any hope, it is to be more worthy of myself. I can't forgive him, it makes me feel ashamed of myself." Richard couldn't get in, so he started giving me flowers. I like white roses the best, so he orders a big bouquet for me every day. I fiddled with it for a while, smiled and said to Chloe, "Bring this flower when you come to visit my grave. I don't like chrysanthemums very much." Chloe took a long while to say yes. Richard changed the color to pink roses the next day, and I thought, well, Chloe is indeed a little liar. It's the enemy's spy. But I didn't say anything. The pink roses also pleased me. I couldn't sleep well in the middle of the night and I could always see a blurry shadow sitting in front of the bed. I wondered if my body was so weak or if my deceased family members had come to pick me up. Until that person held my hand and said, "Emily, I was wrong. Oh, it's Richard." Richard's tears were as warm as his hands. Such a cold man had a hot body temperature. I closed my eyes and fell asleep again. Tell him that rolling around is too tiring and is not as important as my sleep. He comes to my bedside every day, and always talks about nonsense in the middle of the night. "Emily, you don't want me anymore." "Well, no." "Emily, you've lost a lot of weight." "Well, sick." "Emily, will you forgive me? I have already asked everyone else to leave. I will come home on time and tell you that I love you every day just like before." My nose felt sore and I opened my eyes to look at him. "Richard, do you keep testing me because you know how much I indulge you?" He fell silent. "Emily, I was wrong." "What's your fault?" "I just felt bored, so I looked for someone new. I just felt a little unhappy that the person who had always been by my side was suddenly gone. And then I found out that she was going to die soon, so I felt guilty." "No, I'm not." Richard looked the same when he cried at the age of 18 and 28, with tears falling from his lips with pouty sounds. "Richard, you no longer love me. Don't say such self-deceiving words." I tried to straighten myself up and said, "Even if I get better right now and go home with you, you will soon get tired of this kind of life. You just like to find new feelings. If we live together for 5 or 10 years, you will forget all this, and young girls will still come to you one after another." "I won't." His voice was so soft that I pretended I couldn't hear it. "You will bring them to me again and ask me if I want a divorce? If they say they are afraid, you will leave. If they say they are sad, you will abandon me to comfort them. If they say they are pregnant and don't have the child, you will automatically put me in the role of the villain and accuse me." "Emily," I interrupted him. "It's okay. It's really okay. I never wanted to tie you up. I was just afraid that you couldn't see your own heart clearly. How can you?" How can you mistake guilt for love? Richard covered his face and cried like an abandoned puppy. He hugged my waist, his tears soaked my clothes, and he kept saying, I love you, Emily, I love you, Emily. Fraud. I've seen how much Richard loves me, so why is he still trying to lie to me? I looked up and thought, I will not shed another tear for Richard, not even one. 10. I am awake very little of the time, and every time I open my eyes there is a bouquet of pink roses on the bedside. I no longer refuse to allow Richard to enter my ward, but I stopped seeing him either. When Nurse Grace came to give me an injection, she secretly wiped away her tears. I felt guilty and thought that I was not doing enough for the young child, who had just started his internship and had to face the farewell. I squeezed her hand and said, I'll give you a present. What? I'll tell you if you don't cry. The little girl pouted. Who is crying? I'm not crying. I laughed and said, I can only tell you about this gift after I die. Richard would help me wipe my body, and I didn't struggle but just stared at him. You've become a little ugly. He hurriedly put down what he was doing and asked me, What do you think is wrong with me? I'll go fix it. I shook my head. Don't go. No matter how hard you try, you can't go back to 18 overnight. I said I still like clean and fresh young men. Richard forced a smile and gently covered me with the quilt. Richard, you don't like me anymore because I'm no longer 18? I was really curious, but Richard didn't answer. He turned his back to me and sobbed. His back was shaking violently and he cried for a long time as if he was going to faint at any second. At night he held my 4-tube, touched my cheek and said, Emily has always been beautiful, the most beautiful. Liar, then why love others? I ignored him, turned over and fell asleep. After asking Nurse Grace for more painkillers for the nth time, the weather finally warmed up for a short while. After a heavy snowfall, Chloe came in with some fruit and I asked her, Can you take me for a walk? It looks like the weather outside is nice. She looked around. Where's Richard? I said, I went to buy flowers. Chloe smiled but still covered me with thick clothes and pushed me out the door. When I passed by the nurse's station, I saw Nurse Grace. I smiled and waved to her, but she lowered her head and shed tears. I asked Chloe to get me another coat and I waited for her there. I haven't finished watching the TV series yet, said Nurse Grace with red eyes. I laughed. 300 episodes. I've watched 298 of them with you. There are still 2 episodes left. She was telling me that she wanted me back. There are 2 episodes left. You can watch them by yourself. Make sure to finish them. I was telling her that I was going to a new world. I roughly know that this is what is commonly known as a last flicker of light. Nurse Grace was about to say something, but I waved my hand at her and said, Nurse Grace, you must be happy. Such a kind child, you should live the rest of your life well. Chloe pushed me downstairs and I asked her to stop in a warm sunny spot. The early spring sun was warm and I asked lazily, Chloe, did you tell Richard the first was here? Chloe paused, then leaned over and asked me, Would you like some water? I smiled. It's okay. Joseph is getting married. She didn't remain silent this time. Yeah. What do you think? Her gaze shifted far away, and her voice seemed to be blown by the wind. I don't know. I nodded and said nothing more. Babe. I suddenly spoke, calling her by her nickname. Chloe's body stiffened and her eyes turned red. Babe, do you still remember what we wished for when we were in school? Chloe curled her lips and thought for a moment before saying, I want to be a baker. At that time we loved desserts the most. I hope to make the most delicious desserts to make everyone who eats them happy. What a simple wish. Chloe was raised by her mother alone. People who are similar always like to warm each other up, and we try to get closer to each other. The snow on a cold night will be melted by the warm sunshine, and Richard is the hottest light in my life. Emily. I turned my head and saw Richard calling my name from the window, holding a bunch of pink roses. He was so anxious that half of his body was leaning out of the window. I looked at him from afar and thought, that's good enough, just one look, that's enough. Shall we go back? Chloe started to push me away. I held my hand out to stop her, grinning and saying, Babe, this is your punishment for secretly telling Richard. I want you to send me away alone. Chloe's tears welled up and I raised my hand to wipe her tears. Babe, look, if you ask me what I want to see the most, it's this scene right now. I secretly pointed at Richard and said, "He cares about me, takes care of me, and worries about me." He was sweating profusely because he couldn't find me. From the first time I met Richard until today, it's exactly half of my life. I leaned back to make myself more comfortable. Half what a long time. The good and the bad, I got them all from him, the most sincere emotions, the most vicious words, the most difficult feelings to let go. I closed my eyes and said in a choked voice, "Babe, how come we ended up with a man? How could I have forgotten the earliest dream, the simplest wish, the easiest happiness? Babe," I reached out to pull her wrist and whispered, "Babe, I also hope that we live in a fairy tale world, where if we encounter setbacks, someone will come to save us. But no, babe, no." My tears fell and hit my palms, creating a splash of water. "Babe, who can save us? Only we can save ourselves. Babe, I hope you are happy. You deserve to be happy the most. We should be happy." Chloe's lips trembled, tears fell on my hands uncontrollably. She kept saying, "Emily, don't go. Emily, don't go." We are all used to being adults and rarely say such things anymore. The worst thing to do on the road to growing up is to tell children stories. But between life and death, everything can be forgiven. I watched her tears, but I didn't have the strength to wipe them away. "Babe, go do what you want to do. No matter what, I hope you do what you really want to do. Even if it means staying with Joseph and guarding a fruitless love. You need to be happy. Be happy for me. Emily, Emily, wake up. Do you have anything to say to Richard?" Chloe sobbed beside me. My consciousness began to blur. My soul seemed to be drained out, and I could only shake my head stiffly. "What are you talking about? When we were in love, we said enough sweet words. When we were not loved, we said enough words to keep the lover. And when our heart was dead, we said so many cold words. What else do I have to say to him? I have already said everything I could say to him in my life. Turns out that when we reach the end, we have nothing to say." "Babe." I still curled my lips and smiled at her. "It's a sunny day. It's my favorite warm sunny day. It won't be cold on the road to the underworld." "Emily." Someone ran towards me, shouting at the top of his lungs. I looked up and saw Richard, holding a pink rose in his arms. He staggered towards me, as if he had used up all his strength. In a trance, I seemed to see that spring again. A young man in a white and blue school uniform ran towards me breathlessly, holding a bouquet of wild flowers that he had hastily picked up from the roadside. His face turned red with shame, but he still looked me in the eye and said, "Emily, can you be my girlfriend? I promise. I will treat you well." I just smiled, took the flowers and said to him, "Okay, it's a deal. You can't break your promise. Richard, you can't break your promise. It's you who broke your promise." The tear that was promised never to fall still dripped down the eye socket. Spring is back and I am in deep sleep. Richard extra. "You don't want to see me, do you?" The tombstone doesn't speak, the person in the photo just smiles, but I kind of miss the sight of her standing in front of me and scolding me, even if I just take a stick and smash the house to pieces. Unfortunately not. How cruel of you to not even leave me a word. He didn't even let me see him for the last time, and only left me a piece of land for his grave that he had bought long ago. Nurse Grace cried miserably. She said she would never watch the last 2 episodes of the TV series again. She promised you that she would watch it together. The child cried so hard that his eyes were swollen. I fiddled with the big bouquet of roses and said, "She donated all the money you gave her. You have always had better vision. Nurse Grace is a good girl. She said that her purpose was to cure diseases and save lives. This money should go to people who are more meaningful and in need of help. Apart from loving me, you have chosen someone else." Chloe broke up with Joseph. Joseph didn't even get married and just stayed in front of the small shop she bought every day. Chloe didn't see him either. I thought Emily must have said something to Chloe and she wouldn't tell me. "Emily, why don't you come into my dream once?" I still reached out and touched her cold photo. "Yeah, you should blame me. I opened a bottle of wine for myself." "Emily, I blame myself too. It was just new at first, it was new. How come later on, as time went by, we couldn't go back?" "Emily, I never wanted to divorce you. You won't believe it, but I didn't want to divorce you. I thought you would never leave. You have always been behind me. As long as I turn around, you are behind me. How could you leave? I am greedy. Emily, you don't believe anything I say. It doesn't matter. If you don't come to see me, I'll go to see you. I've forgotten my wish. I have a home with you. Emily, after you left, I really have no one else. You must think I'm ridiculous. I also think I'm ridiculous. How come I've only just figured out what I want today? You must have thought that Chloe told me where you were, right? No, I was the one looking for you. Emily, I'm looking for you. I've been looking for you for a long time. You're not at home or at work. I'm so panicked. I can't find you. Then I found you, and you were lying in the hospital. I would rather you lied to me, scolded me, and hit me than be really sick. I wiped away my tears. You're probably going to call me a hypocritical sympathizer again. I thought about it and said, I bought our house back. That's a house that holds our memories. How can we sell it to someone else? I bought the store behind the school. That's your favorite. From now on, I'll do it. You will definitely scold me. It's okay. I dream of being scolded by you. Suddenly I remembered that I had the pastries made by Chloe in my bag, so I quickly took them out and arranged them. Chloe insisted that I give this to you. I almost forgot. She said this was the first one she made. She said she would give it to you. Try it. If it doesn't taste good, go and scold her in her dream. Emily, I miss you so much. Come into my dream too. Okay? I covered my eyes and thought, you definitely don't want to. Okay, then I'll come to you. Postscript. Chloe thought about it for a long time and finally buried Richard's ashes next to Emily. The weather is cold, go back early. Joseph stood beside her and whispered while holding an umbrella. I thought Richard would go down on his own. Joseph's eyes darkened. The memory is too heavy. He can't let it go. Then why did you do that in the first place? Joseph lowered his head. Because I can't see clearly. Chloe gathered her clothes and turned to walk out. Let me take you back to the store. Chloe pointed at the figure standing under the tree and said, No, my husband is waiting for me. You should go back early. The weather is cold. The memories are too heavy. Who can let go of them? If you can't see it clearly, then you're destined to miss it.